Waitress humiliates disabled boy without realizing he was the son of a millionaire. The waitress who humiliated that disabled boy thought she was just dealing with another inconvenient customer who would slow down her morning tips. She had no idea that the 8-year-old child struggling to order scrambled eggs was Tommy Harrison, son of a tech billionaire worth $3.8 billion. 8-year-old Tommy Harrison sat quietly in his wheelchair, his twisted fingers struggling to hold the menu while his father, dressed in worn jeans and a simple t-shirt, helped him decide what to order. Nobody in that crowded restaurant could have imagined that this disabled child, who was about to be humiliated by their most popular waitress, was actually the son of one of Colorado's wealthiest tech entrepreneurs. What happened next would teach everyone in that diner a lesson they would never forget. Sarah Miller, a 23-year-old waitress known for her charm with regular customers, was about to make the biggest mistake of her professional life, one that would ultimately transform not just her own future, but the lives of everyone who witnessed what unfolded that Saturday morning. Robert Harrison had built his fortune from nothing, creating one of the most successful software companies in the Midwest, but you'd never know it looking at him that morning in his faded jeans and old college t-shirt. He deliberately dressed down whenever he took Tommy out, wanting his son to experience normal life without the burden of their wealth following them everywhere they went. The choice to eat at this particular diner wasn't random either. It was where Robert's father had taken him as a child, back when they could barely afford the pancakes they shared. Tommy had been born with cerebral palsy, his brilliant mind trapped in a body that refused to cooperate, making simple tasks like eating in public a challenging adventure that most people couldn't understand. Despite his physical limitations, or perhaps because of them, Tommy had developed an extraordinary capacity for reading people, seeing past their facades to their true nature. Sarah Miller approached their table with her practiced smile, the one she reserved for customers she deemed worthy of her attention, but it faltered the moment she saw Tommy's trembling hands knock over the salt shaker. The 23-year-old waitress prided herself on her efficiency and her ability to turn tables quickly during the breakfast rush, maximizing her tips. She had been working at the diner for 2 years, saving money for nursing school, though lately she'd been growing increasingly bitter about serving people she felt were beneath her ambition. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and meticulously applied makeup couldn't hide the disdain that flashed across her face as she watched Tommy struggle to control his movements. "Maybe you should consider takeout next time," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for nearby tables to hear but thinking the father and son wouldn't catch it. She had no idea that Robert Harrison had built his empire on reading people, understanding their motivations, their fears, and their character within moments of meeting them. He'd heard every single word Sarah had said, and more importantly, he'd seen the way her casual cruelty had made his son's shoulders slump in defeat. Tommy was used to stares and whispers, but something about being dismissed so coldly in his favorite restaurant cut deeper than usual. Robert's jaw tightened as he watched his son try to make himself smaller in his wheelchair, as if he could disappear from the judgment around him. But what neither Sarah nor Robert expected was that this moment was being witnessed by someone who would change the entire trajectory of this story. Margaret Chen sat 3 tables away, her phone discreetly positioned to capture what she thought would be a heartwarming breakfast scene for her food blog that reached over 2 million followers worldwide. The 35-year-old influencer had come specifically to review this local diner's famous blueberry pancakes, having heard they were the best in Denver. She had already filmed the charming retro interior and interviewed Marcus, the owner, about his grandmother's secret recipe. But now her camera was catching something entirely different, something that would soon captivate millions of viewers for reasons that had nothing to do with food. Margaret zoomed in slightly, her journalist instincts telling her that something significant was about to unfold at table 7. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor, creating an almost theatrical setting for what was about to happen. Other customers continued their conversations, unaware that they were about to witness a confrontation between cruelty and grace that would become a viral sensation. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, mixing with the tension that was building at Tommy and Robert's table. Sarah stood there impatiently, her pen tapping against her order pad, completely oblivious to the fact that her life was about to change forever. And at the center of it all sat Tommy Harrison, 8 years old, physically challenged but spiritually unbreakable, about to teach everyone in that diner a lesson about the true meaning of strength and dignity. The morning rush was in full swing when Sarah grabbed the coffee pot with more force than necessary, her frustration already building as she watched Tommy struggle to communicate his order. His speech was slurred and slow, each word requiring enormous effort as his mouth fought to form the sounds his brain commanded. The other customers tried not to stare, but the uncomfortable silence that fell over nearby tables was palpable. Tommy's eyes, bright blue and remarkably intelligent despite his physical limitations, darted between his father and Sarah, aware of the tension but determined to order for himself like any other 8-year-old boy would. His twisted fingers gripped the menu with determination, the laminated pages shaking but held firm by his resolve to be independent. "Can you just point to what you want?" Sarah said sharply, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a knife, tapping her pen against her notepad with increasing irritation. "Some of us have other tables to serve, and honestly, I don't have all morning to play guessing games here." The words hung in the air like poison, and several customers turned to look at the source of such callousness. An elderly couple at the next table exchanged shocked glances, the woman's hand flying to her mouth in disbelief. Sarah's fellow waitress, Jennifer, who had been refilling coffee at a nearby booth, froze mid-pour, her eyes wide with horror at what she was witnessing. Robert felt his jaw clench so hard he thought his teeth might crack, but he maintained his composure, gently helping Tommy form the words he wanted to say. "Take your time, buddy," he said softly to his son, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "You're doing great, just like we practiced at home." Tommy nodded, swallowing hard before trying again, his determination inspiring and heartbreaking in equal measure. "I would like scrambled eggs, please," he managed, each word a victory against his uncooperative body. The effort it took was visible in the beads of sweat that formed on his forehead, but the pride in his eyes when he finished was unmistakable. The boy's eyes, bright and intelligent despite his physical limitations, filled with tears. He was desperately trying to hold back, not wanting to cry in public. He had been so excited about coming to the diner, had practiced ordering all week with his speech therapist, and now this waitress was making him feel like a burden. Other customers began to notice the interaction more openly now, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats while others whispered among themselves about the rude waitress who seemed to have no heart. A mother dining with her 2 children pulled them closer, as if Sarah's cruelty was contagious, while shooting sympathetic looks at Robert and Tommy. The atmosphere in the diner had shifted from pleasant morning chatter to tense anticipation, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. But what made the situation even more remarkable was Tommy's response to Sarah's cruelty, something that wouldn't be fully understood until later. Instead of retreating into himself or giving up, the boy straightened slightly in his wheelchair, gathering every ounce of dignity his small body could muster. His father watched with a mixture of pride and pain as Tommy refused to be diminished by someone else's ignorance. "And orange juice, please," Tommy added, his voice stronger this time, as if Sarah's rudeness had somehow given him courage rather than taking it away. Robert placed his hand gently on his son's shoulder, a silent message of support and pride that spoke volumes about their relationship and the battles they faced together every single day. What Sarah didn't know was that Margaret Chen had shifted from filming food to documenting something far more important, her journalistic instincts recognizing a story that needed to be told. She had covered human interest stories before transitioning to food blogging, and she knew injustice when she saw it unfolding before her eyes. Her phone captured everything in crystal clear high definition, from Sarah's eye rolls to Tommy's brave attempts to maintain his dignity in the face of such treatment. Margaret's followers often praised her for finding the human stories behind the food, but this was different. This was about basic human decency being violated. She made sure to capture not just the main interaction, but also the reactions of other customers, painting a complete picture of how one person's cruelty affected an entire community space. Tommy finally managed to complete his order, his voice barely above a whisper now, exhausted from the effort and the emotional toll of the encounter. Sarah rolled her eyes dramatically, making no effort to hide her disdain as she scribbled on her notepad with exaggerated movements. "Scrambled eggs," she repeated mockingly, pitching her voice in a cruel imitation of Tommy's struggled speech as she walked past Jennifer at the service station. "Like we're running a special needs daycare here instead of a restaurant," she added, loud enough for half the diner to hear. The words cut through the air like a physical blow, and several customers gasped audibly, unable to believe someone could be so heartlessly cruel to a child. Robert's hands tightened on the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white as he fought every instinct that told him to stand up and defend his son more aggressively. The successful businessman who had negotiated million-dollar deals and faced down corporate sharks was struggling to maintain control in the face of someone attacking his child. But then Tommy placed his small, shaking hand on his father's arm, a gesture that said more than words ever could, a plea for peace rather than confrontation. The boy's emotional intelligence, trapped in that uncooperative body, understood something his father was still learning, that responding to cruelty with more aggression only perpetuates the cycle of harm. It was a moment that several witnesses would later describe as transformative, watching a disabled child show more maturity than most adults could muster. But before I reveal what really happened, drop a like if you're enjoying this story. The kitchen door swung open with a bang that made everyone jump, and out walked Marcus Washington, the diner's owner, his face a mask of controlled fury. The 58-year-old veteran had been watching everything from the service window, his hands gripping the pass so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Marcus had built this diner on principles of community and acceptance, turning it from a struggling breakfast joint into a beloved local institution over 20 years. His own son had autism, and seeing this display of ignorance and cruelty in his establishment made his blood boil with a rage he hadn't felt since his days in the military. Every step he took toward Sarah was measured, controlled, but everyone could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. "Sarah, my office now," he commanded, his voice cutting through the breakfast chatter like a drill sergeant's bark. The entire diner fell silent, forks suspended midway to mouths, coffee cups frozen in mid-sip, everyone watching this drama unfold. Sarah shrugged with a casualness that shocked everyone who had witnessed her behavior, assuming it was about her overtime request from last week. She had the audacity to look annoyed at the interruption, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit her. Tell me in the comments, what would you do in this situation? Meanwhile, Robert pulled out his phone, not to call his lawyers or make a scene, but to do something entirely unexpected that would reveal his true character. He opened his company's website and began typing an email to his head of human resources, his fingers moving with the same precision he used when coding in his early days. The email wasn't about lawsuits or revenge. It was about something much more powerful and transformative than punishment could ever be. He glanced at Tommy, who was watching him with those perceptive eyes that missed nothing, understanding far more than his physical limitations might suggest to casual observers. "What are you doing, Dad?" Tommy asked quietly, his words clearer when he wasn't under pressure, and Robert smiled, a plan forming in his mind that would change lives. Marcus had built this diner on principles that went beyond serving good food. It was about serving the community with dignity and respect for all. His office walls were covered with photos from community events, fundraisers for local families in need, and celebrations of milestones both big and small. There were pictures of his own son, David, now 25 and working as a special education teacher, thanks to the support of this very community. The contrast between those images of inclusion and joy and what he had just witnessed in his dining room made his stomach turn with disgust. Sarah sat across from him, still oblivious, checking her phone as if she had been called in for a routine schedule change rather than a serious discussion about her behavior. "Do you have any idea what you just did out there?" Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous like the calm before a storm. Sarah looked up, finally sensing that something was wrong, but her defensive walls were already going up, visible in the way she crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair. "I was just trying to take an order from a difficult customer," she replied, her tone suggesting she was the victim in this situation. "It's not my fault if some people can't communicate properly and slow down service for everyone else." Marcus felt his eye twitch, a sign his employees knew meant he was barely controlling his temper, and he took a deep breath before responding. Back in the dining room, something beautiful was beginning to happen that no one could have predicted when the morning started. Dorothy Henderson, an 82-year-old retired teacher who had been coming to this diner for 15 years, slowly stood up from her table. Her cane shook slightly with the effort, but her voice was strong and clear as she addressed the room. "I've been coming here since Marcus opened this place, and I've never been so ashamed of what I've witnessed today," she announced, her teacher's voice carrying to every corner. "That young boy showed more courage ordering his breakfast than that waitress has shown in her entire time working here." She then walked over to Robert and Tommy's table, each step deliberate despite her age, and when she reached them, She did something that brought tears to Robert's eyes. She pulled out a chair and sat down at their table, uninvited but entirely welcome, and looked Tommy straight in the eye with respect, not pity. "Young man," she said with a warm smile that had comforted hundreds of students over her 40-year career, "you are a credit to your father, and don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." She then turned to Robert, her eyes twinkling with a combination of sympathy and admiration. "And you, sir, are raising a remarkable child who understands grace and dignity better than most adults I've known." Tommy's face lit up with a smile so bright it could have powered the entire city of Denver. Sarah emerged from Marcus's office 5 minutes later, her face flushed with indignation rather than shame, the warning she'd received clearly not having the intended impact. Marcus had given her one last chance, against his better judgment, but only because he believed in redemption and second chances, values his own son had taught him. She returned to Robert and Tommy's table with their order, practically slamming the plates down with enough force to make the eggs jump on the plate. The childish display of temper would have been laughable if it wasn't directed at an 8-year-old child who had done nothing but try to order breakfast. "Your eggs," she said curtly, emphasizing each word as if speaking to someone who couldn't understand English. "Exactly as ordered." But as she turned to leave, Tommy's wavering voice stopped her in her tracks, saying something that would haunt her for months to come. "Thank you, miss," he said with genuine kindness, each word a struggle but filled with sincerity. "I hope your day gets better." The entire diner seemed to hold its breath, watching this incredible display of compassion from a child who had every right to be angry or hurt. Sarah paused, something in his tone making her look back, really look at the child she had been so cruel to, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. For a split second, she saw past the wheelchair and the twisted limbs to the bright, compassionate soul within, a soul that was choosing to show her kindness despite her cruelty. But pride won over conscience, and she walked away without a word, her steps quicker than necessary, almost running from the moment of potential redemption that Tommy had offered her. What she didn't see was the way Tommy's simple act of kindness had affected everyone who witnessed it, creating a ripple effect of compassion throughout the diner. Other customers began standing up, some literally and some figuratively, for what was right, creating an atmosphere of support that wrapped around Tommy and Robert like a warm blanket. A businessman in a $1,000 suit got up from his power breakfast and walked over to their table, pressing a business card into Robert's hand. "I run a foundation for children with disabilities," he said quietly. "Your son just taught me more about dignity than any seminar ever could." Jennifer, who had been watching from the service station, made a decision that would cost her later, but felt right in the moment. She walked over to Tommy and Robert's table with a piece of the diner's famous chocolate cake, one that wasn't on their order. "This is from me," she said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Your son reminds me why I got into this business, to serve people and make their days a little brighter." She shot a look at Sarah, who was aggressively wiping down an already clean counter, and added loud enough for everyone to hear, "Some of us haven't forgotten what that means." The solidarity was spreading through the diner like wildfire, customers beginning to stand up for what was right, creating a moment of community that Marcus would later describe as the proudest in his establishment's history. Robert watched this all unfold with a mixture of pride and sadness, proud of his son's incredible capacity for forgiveness, sad that such kindness was met with such coldness from someone who should know better. He pulled out his business card, but not the one with his title as CEO of Harrison Technologies, just a simple card with his name and number, a deliberate choice that spoke to his character. He wrote a note on a napkin with careful deliberation, each word chosen to maximize impact while maintaining the grace his son had shown. "Your waitress taught my son a valuable lesson today about how not to treat people. Despite her behavior, we're leaving a $200 tip, because my son believes everyone deserves kindness, even those who don't show it to others." He signed it simply, Robert and Tommy Harrison, knowing that the name would mean something very different once Sarah discovered who they really were. What Robert didn't write was that Harrison Technologies was about to launch a nationwide campaign about disability awareness, and that this diner would feature prominently in it. The campaign had been in development for months, inspired by Tommy's experiences navigating a world not built for him, but today's events had given it a new urgency and direction. The initial plan had been corporate and polished, but now Robert knew it needed to be raw and real, showing both the cruelty and kindness that people with disabilities face daily. He pulled out his phone again and sent a quick message to his marketing director. Change of plans. We're going with authentic stories, starting with one from this morning. The response was immediate. Whatever you need, boss. The team is ready. Margaret Chen had captured everything, from Sarah's initial rudeness to Tommy's incredible grace under pressure, her phone's memory filling with footage that would soon change lives. She was already mentally editing the video, knowing exactly which moments would resonate with her audience and beyond. The contrast between Sarah's cruelty and Tommy's kindness was so stark it seemed almost scripted, but the raw emotion on everyone's faces proved this was painfully real. She had come for pancakes and found a story about the best and worst of humanity, playing out in a humble diner in Denver. Her fingers were already itching to upload, but she wanted to make sure she had the complete story first, sensing that this wasn't over yet. Within hours, Margaret's video would go viral, but not in the way anyone expected, becoming something much more powerful than public shaming. Instead of becoming another story about cancel culture and mob justice, it would become a testament to the power of kindness in the face of cruelty. The comments section exploded with messages of support for Tommy, and thousands of parents of disabled children shared their own stories of discrimination and triumph. People began using the hashtag #Tommy'sKindness, sharing moments when they chose compassion over conflict, creating a movement that neither Margaret nor Robert could have anticipated. News outlets started reaching out within hours, wanting to interview the family, but Robert declined them all, saying Tommy's actions spoke louder than any interview could. But the real plot twist was yet to come, something that would transform this from a story about one bad morning into something that would change lives across the country. That afternoon, as Sarah was counting her tips and discovered the $200 with Robert's note, her hands began to shake uncontrollably. She read the note 3 times, each reading making her stomach sink further as the reality of her behavior started to penetrate her defensive walls. The amount of the tip compared to how she had treated them made her feel sick, but it was the signature that made her reach for her phone with trembling fingers. She Googled the name Robert Harrison and nearly fainted when she saw his picture next to a Forbes article titled, "Tech Billionaire Who Lives Like an Average Joe." The article detailed how Robert Harrison, worth an estimated $3.8 billion, was known for his modest lifestyle and his dedication to disability causes following his son's diagnosis. There were pictures of him at various charity events, always with Tommy by his side, both of them dressed in simple clothes that gave no hint of their wealth. The article mentioned how he often went undercover to understand the real experiences of people with disabilities and their families, using what he learned to shape his company's policies and products. Sarah's phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering on the break room floor as the full weight of what she had done crashed down on her. She hadn't just insulted any child. She had shown her worst self to people who had the power to destroy her, but had chosen to show mercy instead. The realization hit her like a freight train. Not just that she had insulted a millionaire's son, but that she had been shown more kindness by that child than she had shown to anyone in months. She thought about Tommy's gentle "thank you" and his hope that her day would get better, even after she had humiliated him in front of a room full of people. The memory of his struggling voice saying those kind words played on repeat in her mind, each repetition making her feel smaller and smaller. The weight of her actions finally crashed down on her, and for the first time in years, Sarah Miller cried genuine tears of shame and regret. She sat in the break room surrounded by the remnants of other people's lunches and faced the ugly truth about who she had become. How had she gotten here, she wondered, to a place where she could be so cruel to a child who was just trying to order breakfast? She thought about her own struggles, working 2 jobs to pay for nursing school applications, dealing with difficult customers every day, and slowly letting bitterness poison her soul. But none of that justified what she had done to Tommy. None of her problems gave her the right to make a child feel less than human. She knew she had to make this right, but how do you apologize for crushing the spirit of a child who had shown you nothing but grace? The note from Robert felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. $200 that she didn't deserve. Kindness she hadn't earned. Marcus, who had been watching her discovery through the break room's open door, approached with a tablet showing the viral video that was already spreading across social media. 3 million views in 6 hours, he said quietly, his voice a mixture of disappointment and something else, maybe hope. The whole country is watching. He set the tablet down in front of her, and Sarah watched herself through the camera's unforgiving eye, seeing her cruelty from the perspective of others for the first time. The woman on the screen looked ugly, not physically, but spiritually. Her pretty face twisted with disdain for a child whose only crime was existing differently. The comments ranged from calls for her firing to death threats, but also, surprisingly, there were people sharing their own stories of redemption, times when they had been cruel and learned to be better. "I should quit," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper, broken by the weight of her shame. "I don't deserve to work here, not after what I did." Marcus sat down across from her, his weathered hands folded on the table, and Sarah saw something in his eyes she didn't expect: understanding. "My son David was diagnosed with autism when he was 3, Marcus said, his voice heavy with memory. "I didn't handle it well at first. I was angry, denied it, even blamed my wife for somehow causing it." He paused, looking at the wall where a picture of David in his college graduation cap hung proudly. "It took me years to learn what Tommy knows instinctively, that everyone deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their challenges. The question isn't whether you deserve to work here," Marcus continued, leaning forward slightly. "The question is whether you're willing to learn from this and become better, or whether you're going to let this define you." Sarah looked up at him through tear-filled eyes, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since she'd started working at the diner. "That boy and his father could destroy you with a single phone call to corporate, could sue us into bankruptcy, could make sure you never work in this town again." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "Instead, they left you a $200 tip and a chance at redemption. The question is, what are you going to do with that chance? If you believe in second chances, drop a like on this video." The next morning, Sarah arrived at work an hour early, standing in the parking lot as the sun began to paint the Denver skyline in shades of gold and pink. She had spent the entire night thinking, wrestling with her pride and shame, replaying Tommy's kindness over and over in her mind. Her first instinct had been to run, to quit and move to another city where her viral moment of cruelty wouldn't follow her. But something about Tommy's words, his hope that her day would get better, made her want to be worthy of that hope. She had written and rewritten an apology letter a dozen times, each version feeling inadequate to express the depth of her regret and the transformation happening inside her. The diner was still dark when Marcus unlocked the door, but he wasn't surprised to see Sarah waiting there, looking like she hadn't slept at all. "They'll be here," he said simply, somehow knowing what she was thinking without her having to say a word. Same table, same time, just like every Saturday for the past 2 years. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression that was hard to read. "What you do with that information is up to you, but Sarah, if you're going to do this, do it right. That boy deserves nothing less than complete honesty." Sarah nodded, her throat too tight with emotion to speak, and followed him into the diner that had become ground zero for her personal reckoning. She threw herself into prep work, her hands shaking as she filled salt shakers and folded silverware into napkins, each mundane task feeling like a meditation on change. Jennifer arrived next, and instead of the cold shoulder Sarah expected, her co-worker squeezed her shoulder gently. "We all make mistakes," Jennifer said quietly. "What matters is what we do after we make them." The simple kindness nearly broke Sarah's composure again, but she held it together, knowing she needed to save her emotional energy for what was coming. Other employees arrived, each one watching her with a mixture of wariness and curiosity, wondering if the viral video had changed her, or if she would double down on her behavior. At exactly 8:30, the bell above the door chimed, and Sarah's heart stopped as Robert and Tommy Harrison entered the diner, same as they did every Saturday morning. But this time, they weren't alone. A woman in her 60s walked beside them, her hand resting gently on Tommy's wheelchair, her resemblance to Robert unmistakable. This must be Tommy's grandmother, Sarah realized, probably here to witness whatever came next, whether it was an apology or another disaster. The diner, which had been buzzing with normal morning conversation, fell silent as other customers recognized them from the viral video, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Robert's expression was unreadable as he helped Tommy to their usual table, but Tommy looked around the room with those bright, intelligent eyes until they found Sarah. When their eyes met, he smiled, that same genuine, warm smile that had haunted her all night, and raised his twisted hand in a small wave. That simple gesture of acknowledgement, of humanity from the child she had dehumanized, nearly brought Sarah to her knees. How could he smile at her after what she had done? How could he acknowledge her existence when she had tried to diminish his? The answer, she was beginning to understand, lay not in what she deserved but in who Tommy chose to be, regardless of how others treated him. Sarah knew this was her moment, her only chance to make things right, and she walked toward their table on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. With shaking hands, she set down 3 glasses of water, taking care not to spill despite her trembling, and then did something that shocked everyone watching. She knelt down beside Tommy's wheelchair, bringing herself to his eye level, abandoning any pretense of professional distance or pride. "Tommy," she began, her voice cracking with emotion, "I need to say something to you." The diner was so quiet you could hear the coffee machine's gentle percolation, everyone straining to hear what would come next. "I was horrible to you yesterday," Sarah continued, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, smearing the makeup she had carefully applied that morning. "There's no excuse for how I treated you. You came here to have breakfast with your dad, something every kid should be able to do, and I made you feel unwelcome and less than human." She paused, swallowing hard, forcing herself to maintain eye contact, even though every instinct told her to look away in shame. "You showed me more kindness in 5 minutes than I've shown anyone in years. When you thanked me and said you hoped my day would get better, even after how cruel I was." She had to stop, overwhelmed by the memory of his grace. Tommy reached out his shaking hand and patted hers gently, the same hand she had looked at with disgust just 24 hours earlier. "It's okay," he said, his voice clearer than yesterday, as if he had been practicing for this moment too. "Everyone makes mistakes. That's what makes us human." The profound wisdom in those simple words, coming from an 8-year-old who had every right to be angry, left not a dry eye in the diner. Even Robert, who had maintained his composure throughout everything, had to wipe his eyes as he watched his son demonstrate a level of emotional maturity that most adults never achieve. "But it's not okay," Sarah insisted, needing him to understand the depth of her regret. "What I did was wrong, and I'm going to work every day to be better, to be someone who deserves the kindness you showed me." She turned to Robert, who was watching her with an intensity that made her want to run, but she held her ground. "Mr. Harrison, I know who you are now, and I know you could have destroyed me, but you didn't. You and Tommy showed me mercy I didn't deserve, and I promise you I won't waste it." Robert studied her for a long moment, seeming to look right through her to gauge the sincerity of her words. "My son insisted we come back," Robert finally said, his voice measured but not unkind. "He said you might need to see that one bad day doesn't define a person. He wanted you to know that." He paused, glancing at Tommy with obvious pride. "Tommy has taught me that real strength isn't about power or money. It's about choosing kindness when the world gives you every reason not to." The grandmother, who had been silent until now, reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "Young lady," she said, her voice warm but firm, "what you did yesterday was wrong, but what you're doing today takes courage. The question now is what you're going to do tomorrow and every day after that." What happened next stunned everyone in the diner, creating a moment that would be talked about in Denver for years to come. Robert Harrison stood up and addressed the entire restaurant, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding boardrooms, but tempered with humanity. "My son has taught me that real strength isn't about power or money," he repeated, louder this time for everyone to hear. "It's about choosing kindness when the world gives you every reason not to." He turned to Sarah, who was still kneeling beside Tommy's wheelchair, mascara-stained tears creating dark rivers down her cheeks. "My company, Harrison Technologies, is launching a program to hire and train individuals who want to make a difference in the disability community." The diner held its collective breath as Robert continued, his words measured and deliberate, each one chosen with the precision of a man who understood the power of second chances. "We're not looking for perfect people with spotless records," he said, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "We're looking for people who have learned hard lessons and want to use those lessons to help others. People who understand what it's like to be wrong and have the courage to make it right." He paused, letting his words sink in not just for Sarah but for everyone listening. "My son thinks you could learn to be an advocate, someone who helps others understand what you didn't understand yesterday. The question is, do you want to learn?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed several times, no sound coming out, her brain unable to process what was being offered to her. This man whose son she had humiliated was offering her not just forgiveness but an opportunity to transform her worst moment into purpose. I don't understand," she finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible even in the silent diner. "Why would you want me after what I did?" Tommy answered before his father could, his words slow but clear, filled with a wisdom that seemed impossible for his age. "Because you already learned the hard part," he said, each word a struggle but worth the effort. "You learned you were wrong." Margaret Chen, who had returned to document this follow-up to her viral video, captured the moment when Tommy Harrison, an 8-year-old boy with cerebral palsy, changed the heart of someone who had tried to break his. She was already planning her follow-up post, knowing that this redemption arc would resonate even more than the original video had. But she also understood that this wasn't just content for social media. This was a real moment of human transformation happening in real time. Her camera captured Sarah nodding through her tears, unable to speak, but her answer clear in the way she gripped Tommy's hand like a lifeline. "There would be training, of course," Robert continued, his business mind already working through the logistics, even as his heart celebrated his son's incredible capacity for forgiveness. "You'd need to complete sensitivity training, shadow our current advocates, and eventually, if you prove yourself, you could lead workshops for other companies." He pulled out a proper business card this time, one with the Harrison Technologies logo embossed in silver, and placed it on the table in front of Sarah. "The starting salary is $60,000 a year with full benefits and tuition reimbursement if you want to continue your nursing education." The amount made several people in the diner gasp. It was more than most of them made in their current jobs, and it was being offered to someone who had just gone viral for all the wrong reasons. Sarah stared at the card as if it might disappear if she blinked, her mind struggling to process how her worst day was somehow becoming an opportunity for a completely different life. "Mr. Harrison," she said, finally finding her voice, though it shook with emotion, "I don't deserve this. What I did to Tommy was unforgivable." She looked at the boy who was now contentedly eating the scrambled eggs Jennifer had brought him, seemingly unbothered by the drama swirling around him. "How can you trust me with something this important when I showed you the worst of who I am?" The question hung in the air, and everyone in the diner seemed to lean in, waiting for the answer. Robert's mother, who had been quietly observing everything, spoke up for the first time, her voice carrying the wisdom of 7 decades of living. "Trust isn't given, young lady. It's earned," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "What my son is offering you isn't trust. It's an opportunity to earn that trust. What you do with that opportunity will determine whether you deserve it or not." She reached over and smoothed Tommy's hair with a grandmother's gentle touch. "My grandson has a gift for seeing the potential in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. He saw something in you yesterday, even in your cruelty, that made him believe you could be better." Tommy looked up from his eggs, his face serious despite the bit of scrambled egg on his chin that his grandmother quickly wiped away. "Miss Sarah," he said, his words coming easier now that he was relaxed and fed, "my dad says that the best teachers are people who made mistakes and learned from them." He paused, gathering his thoughts with visible effort. "You could teach other people not to be mean to kids like me. You understand now why it's wrong." The simple logic of his statement, the pure hope in his voice, broke through the last of Sarah's defenses. The entire diner seemed to exhale collectively as Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face as she accepted the business card with trembling hands. "I'll do whatever it takes," she promised, her voice stronger now with determination. "I'll go to every training, read every book, shadow every advocate you have. I'll earn the chance you're giving me." She stood up slowly, her knees protesting from kneeling for so long, and looked around the diner at all the faces watching her. "And I'll start right here, right now, by promising everyone in this room that I'll never let my bad day become someone else's nightmare again." Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into learning everything she could about disability awareness and advocacy with an intensity that surprised everyone who knew her. She arrived at Harrison Technologies' sprawling campus in suburban Denver, feeling like an imposter, carrying a notebook and wearing the only professional outfit she owned. The building was modern and fully accessible, with ramps alongside every staircase, braille on every sign, and quiet spaces designed for people with sensory sensitivities. Every detail of the architecture spoke to a commitment to inclusion that went beyond mere compliance with regulations. Sarah realized that Robert Harrison hadn't just built a successful company, he had built a place where his son and others like him could thrive. Her trainer was a woman named Patricia Gonzalez, a wheelchair user herself who had been paralyzed in a car accident 10 years earlier and had become one of the country's leading disability rights advocates. Patricia didn't go easy on Sarah because of her viral redemption story. If anything, she was harder on her because of it. "You're going to be in the spotlight," Patricia explained during their first meeting, her tone professional but not unfriendly. "People are watching to see if this is real change or just a publicity stunt. Every mistake you make won't just reflect on you, but on every person with a disability who chose to forgive someone who hurt them." The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming, but Sarah welcomed it, understanding that this pressure was part of her penance and her growth. She volunteered at the local center, where Tommy received his physical therapy, spending her evenings and weekends observing and learning from families facing challenges she had never imagined. She met mothers who hadn't slept through the night in years, fathers who had quit high-paying jobs to become caregivers, and siblings who defended their disabled brothers and sisters with fierce loyalty. Each story added another layer to her understanding, another crack in the shell of ignorance she had built around herself. One mother, Maria, whose daughter had Down syndrome, told her something that stuck with her. "The worst part isn't the disability itself. It's the way people look at us like we're either tragic or inspiring, never just normal families doing our best." Sarah also started attending Tommy's therapy sessions, with Robert's permission, watching as he worked through exercises that would be simple for most children but required enormous effort from him. She saw him struggle, fail, get frustrated, and try again, over and over, with a determination that humbled her. During one particularly difficult session, when Tommy was trying to improve his grip strength and couldn't hold onto the therapy ball, he started to cry from frustration. Without thinking, Sarah found herself kneeling beside him, just as she had that day in the diner. "Hey, remember what you told me?" she said softly. "Everyone makes mistakes. That's what makes us human. The ball made a mistake and slipped, that's all. Let's try again." Tommy looked at her with surprise, then smiled through his tears and nodded, trying again with renewed determination. The therapist later told Sarah that it was the first time Tommy had accepted encouragement from someone other than his immediate family or medical team. "You're building trust," the therapist explained. "That's not something that can be taught in sensitivity training. That comes from genuine care and consistency." Robert, who had been watching from the observation room, sent Sarah a simple text. "You're getting it." Those 3 words meant more to her than any performance review she had ever received, because they came from someone who had every reason to doubt her, but was choosing to believe in her transformation instead. The story of Tommy and Sarah became legend in the Denver community, but more importantly, it became a catalyst for real change in how businesses approached disability inclusion. Marcus's Diner was the first to undergo a complete accessibility renovation, funded partially by a grant from Harrison Technologies and partially by crowdfunding from community members who had been moved by the story. Sarah led the charge, working with contractors to ensure every detail was perfect, from the height of the tables to the width of the aisles to the lighting that wouldn't trigger sensory overload. The grand reopening drew hundreds of people, including families with disabled members who had never felt comfortable dining out before. "I was the worst kind of person," Sarah would tell corporate groups during her presentations, which had become highly sought after by companies wanting to improve their inclusion practices. "I judged someone by their appearance and abilities, not their heart. But an 8-year-old boy taught me that everyone has value, everyone has dignity, and everyone deserves respect." She would show the viral video, forcing herself to watch her cruelty again and again, never letting herself forget where she had come from. Then she would show videos of Tommy's recent accomplishments, like when he managed to type his first complete sentence on his communication device. "Sarah is my friend now." The contrast never failed to move audiences to tears. The program that Robert created, officially called the Second Chances Initiative, expanded beyond Harrison Technologies to include partnerships with dozens of major corporations. Sarah became its unofficial spokesperson, traveling the country to share her story and train others in disability advocacy. But she always returned to Denver, to the diner where it all started, to have Saturday breakfast with Tommy and Robert. Those breakfasts became a tradition, a weekly reminder of how far they had all come. Other families started joining them, creating an informal support group for parents of disabled children and their siblings. 6 months after that fateful morning, Sarah stood before a crowd of over 500 people at a disability rights conference in Washington, D.C. She had been invited to speak about the power of redemption and the importance of second chances in creating lasting social change. In the audience sat Tommy and Robert, along with Dorothy, the elderly woman who had first stood up for them in the diner. Tommy was using his new communication device, which Harrison Technologies had developed based on his specific needs, to live tweet the event. His posts, filled with encouragement and pride for Sarah's journey, were being shared thousands of times. "My friend Sarah used to be mean," he typed. "Now she teaches people to be kind. Everyone can change if someone believes in them." The impact went beyond individual transformation, as companies that implemented Sarah's training programs reported not just better treatment of customers with disabilities, but improved overall customer service and employee satisfaction. It turned out that when you trained people to see the humanity in everyone, to patience and kindness with those who struggled, it made them better at their jobs across the board. Marcus's Diner became a case study in business schools, showing how standing for your values, even when it might cost you customers or employees, could ultimately lead to greater success. The diner's revenue had doubled since the incident, with people driving from neighboring states just to eat where kindness had won over cruelty. A year later, at Tommy's 9th birthday party held at the diner that had become a second home to so many families, Sarah stood before a crowd of over 100 people who had become part of their extended community. She had prepared a speech, but when the moment came, she set aside her notes and spoke from the heart. "A year ago, I was someone who saw disability as an inconvenience, who treated a child's struggle as an annoyance to my day," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I was the person that every parent of a disabled child fears meeting when they dare to venture out into the world." The room was silent, everyone hanging on her words, including several new families who had only heard the story secondhand. "But Tommy Harrison saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself," she continued, looking directly at the boy who was beaming from his place of honor at the head table. "When I gave him cruelty, he gave me kindness. When I tried to make him small, he showed me how to be bigger than my worst impulses. This 9-year-old boy who faces more challenges before breakfast than most of us face in a week taught me the true meaning of strength." She pulled out a wrapped gift, one that had taken her months to prepare with the help of developers from Harrison Technologies. "Tommy, you gave me my purpose. This is my gift back to you and every child like you." With shaking hands, Tommy unwrapped the gift to reveal a tablet with a special app displayed on the screen. Sarah had worked with a team of developers from Robert's company to create an application that would help nonverbal or speech-impaired children communicate in restaurants, making ordering food easier and more dignified. The app used a combination of pictures, text-to-speech, and predictive ordering based on past preferences. But what made it special was that it was designed with input from dozens of families Sarah had met through her advocacy work, incorporating real-world needs and challenges. "It's called Tommy's Table," she announced, "and it's going to be free for any family that needs it, funded by the Harrison Foundation." Tommy's response, typed out on his communication device and displayed on a screen Marcus had installed specially for the occasion, appeared for everyone to read. "You were never a bad person, Miss Sarah. You were just lost. Now you're found. Thank you for finding your way back to kindness." The room erupted in applause, but it was drowned out by the sound of Sarah's sobs as she hugged Tommy, careful not to squeeze too hard, but holding on like he was her anchor to the person she had become. Robert stood and joined the embrace, and soon they were surrounded by the entire community they had built together. A community born from one moment of cruelty, transformed into countless moments of grace. Before I continue, tell me in the comments, has someone's faith in you ever changed your life? The ripple effects of that morning in the diner continued to spread in ways no one could have predicted. The app Sarah had developed was downloaded over 1 million times in its first month, with reviews from grateful parents calling it life-changing. Major restaurant chains began implementing training based on Sarah's program, and several states introduced legislation requiring disability awareness training for all customer service positions. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in Sarah herself, who had gone from someone who saw difference as an inconvenience to someone who celebrated the unique perspective every person brought to the world. She completed her nursing degree with a specialization in pediatric care for children with special needs, funded by the scholarship program Robert had established in Tommy's name. 3 years passed, and Sarah Miller stood at the podium of the United Nations Conference on Disability Rights, having been invited to share the story that had captivated the world and sparked a movement. She looked out at delegates from 70 countries, all gathered to discuss how to create a more inclusive world, and thought about how a single moment of cruelty in a Denver diner had led to this. Transformation doesn't happen in the grand gestures, she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through profound change. It happens in the small moments when we choose to see each other as human beings, deserving of dignity and respect. I learned this from a boy who had every reason to write me off but chose to write me into a better story instead. Tommy, now 12 years old and using advanced assistive technology to communicate more easily than ever before, was watching the speech from his classroom at the inclusive school Robert had helped establish. His classmates, both disabled and non-disabled, gathered around the smartboard to watch Tommy's friend Sarah speak to the world. The boy who had once struggled to order scrambled eggs was now a straight-A student who had just won a national essay contest with a piece about the power of forgiveness. His essay, titled "The Day I Changed a Heart," would later be included in textbooks across the country as required reading for understanding empathy and inclusion. The Harrison Technologies Second Chances initiative had evolved into a global movement, with chapters in 15 countries and partnerships with hundreds of corporations. Sarah served as its international director, traveling the world to train others in the art of transformation, both personal and institutional, but she always returned to Denver, to the diner where it all began, for Saturday breakfast with the family that had become her own. Robert had become more than an employer. He had become a brother in the truest sense, someone who had seen her at her worst and helped her become her best. And Tommy remained her North Star, the constant reminder of why kindness matters more than being right. Marcus's diner had become a pilgrimage site of sorts, with people from around the world stopping by to see where the famous confrontation had taken place. The table where Tommy and Robert always sat had been bronzed and turned into a monument to second chances, with a plaque that read, "At this table, on March 15, 2025, a child's forgiveness changed the world." Marcus had retired but passed the diner to Jennifer, who had been inspired by Sarah's transformation to go back to school herself, earning a degree in business management with a focus on social enterprise. The diner now employed several people with disabilities and had become a model for inclusive hiring practices. The documentary about Tommy and Sarah's story, titled "The Power of Scrambled Eggs," had won an Academy Award, with both of them walking the red carpet together, Sarah pushing Tommy's wheelchair as he waved to the crowd. In his acceptance speech, the director had said, "This isn't just a story about disability rights or personal redemption. It's a story about the choice we all face every day, to respond to difference with fear or with love." Tommy Harrison and Sarah Miller showed us that love is always the right choice, even when it's the harder one. The documentary's profits were donated to disability advocacy organizations worldwide, funding programs that continued to change lives long after the cameras stopped rolling. Today, Sarah Miller runs one of the most successful disability advocacy programs in the world, working directly with Tommy Harrison, who, despite his physical challenges, had just graduated from MIT with a degree in computer science and a minor in disability studies. Their partnership had evolved from advocate and inspiration to true collaborators, developing technologies and programs that had improved the lives of millions. Tommy's graduation speech, delivered through his advanced communication system, had gone viral just like that first video, but for entirely different reasons. "Sarah Miller once thought I was less than human," he had said, his synthesized voice carrying remarkable emotion. "Now she teaches others to see the human in everyone. That's the power of second chances, the power of choosing love over fear." The company they founded together, Dignity Technologies, had just gone public with a valuation of $2 billion, but they had structured it as a benefit corporation, ensuring that profits would always be balanced with purpose. Every product they developed, from communication apps to adaptive gaming controllers to restaurant accessibility tools, was designed with input from the disabled community and offered on a sliding scale to ensure no one was excluded due to cost. Sarah often joked that she had gone from slamming plates to changing plates, meaning the platforms on which society operated. But the joke carried a profound truth about the journey she had traveled. Robert Harrison, when asked about that fateful morning in interviews, always said the same thing. "I could have destroyed her with a lawsuit or public humiliation, but my son taught me that building someone up is infinitely more powerful than tearing them down." He had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Harrison Technologies to focus on the foundation he had established, which had given away over $500 million to disability causes. But his greatest pride wasn't in the money given, but in the lives changed, starting with Sarah Miller, who had become like a daughter to him, completing the family that had been broken by his wife's death. The diner in Denver still has their picture on the wall, a photo taken on the 5-year anniversary of that first confrontation, showing Tommy, Sarah, Robert, Marcus, Dorothy, and dozens of other community members who had become family. Every new employee hears the story on their first day, not as a warning but as an inspiration. Marcus, though retired, still comes in every Saturday to see his kids, as he calls Tommy and Sarah, always greeting them with the same words, "We serve food here, but more importantly, we serve humanity." The tradition had spread to diners and restaurants across the country, with Humanity First plaques appearing in establishments that had committed to inclusive practices. Tommy, now an adult who designs accessibility software that has helped millions navigate a world not built for them, still visits the diner every Saturday morning. And Sarah, she's always there, not as a waitress anymore, but as a friend, a sister, a living testament to the power of transformation. Their table has a small bronze plaque that simply reads, "Where kindness won." But those who know the story understand that it means so much more. It marks the spot where the world became a little bit better, one act of forgiveness at a time. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Sarah's office at Dignity Technologies by a courier who insisted on placing it directly in her hands. The return address was from the Nobel Committee in Oslo, and Sarah's hands shook as she opened it, thinking it must be some mistake. But there it was, in elegant script. Tommy Harrison and Sarah Miller had been jointly nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for their work in transforming a moment of discrimination into a global movement for dignity and inclusion. The nomination had been submitted by a coalition of disability rights organizations from 40 countries, all testifying to how their story and subsequent work had changed policies, perspectives, and lives around the world. When Sarah called Tommy to share the news, his response was characteristic of the wisdom he had carried since childhood. "We didn't do anything special, Sarah. We just showed people that everyone deserves a second chance, even the people who don't give them." But the committee saw it differently, recognizing that their story had done more to advance disability rights and human dignity than decades of legislation and advocacy had achieved. The ceremony in Oslo was attended by heads of state, celebrities, and activists. But Tommy insisted that the real guests of honor were the families from the Denver diner, the community that had witnessed and supported their transformation from the very beginning. In her acceptance speech, standing beside Tommy, whose words were displayed on screens throughout the magnificent hall, Sarah said something that would be quoted in history books. "5 years ago, I humiliated a disabled child in a diner because I saw his struggles as an inconvenience to my day. That child responded with kindness I didn't deserve, and faith I hadn't earned. He didn't just change my life. He showed the world that transformation is possible when we choose to see each other's humanity." Tommy's portion of the speech, delivered through his advanced communication system, was equally powerful. Forgiveness isn't just about the person being forgiven. It's about choosing to live in a world where people can grow beyond their worst moments. Sarah proved that anyone can change. I just gave her the chance to prove it. The prize money, all $2 million of it, was immediately donated to establish Second Chances Centers in 50 cities around the world, places where people who had made mistakes could learn to become advocates for those they had wronged. Sarah personally oversaw the training at each center, sharing not just the techniques of advocacy, but the deeper truth she had learned. That transformation requires both the humility to admit wrongdoing and the courage to become better. The centers became incubators for thousands of stories of redemption, creating a global network of people who understood that their worst day didn't have to define their legacy. 5 years later, as Sarah stood in that same Denver diner, now a historical landmark, she watched Tommy, despite his physical limitations, teaching a class of business students about inclusive design. His movements were still affected by cerebral palsy, but his mind was sharp as ever, his humor intact, and his capacity for seeing the best in people unchanged. The secret to inclusion, he was saying, his words appearing on the screen behind him, isn't accommodation. It's recognition that every person has something valuable to contribute, even the ones who don't see their own value yet. The students hung on every word, some crying as they recognized themselves in his message. Sarah smiled, remembering the frightened, angry girl she had been, and feeling grateful for the journey that had brought her here, to this place where kindness had won and continued winning every single day. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about how you treat others or how you might transform your own worst moments into opportunities for growth, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment telling us about a time when unexpected kindness changed your life, or when you chose forgiveness over revenge and saw miracles happen. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we share stories every week that remind us of the good in humanity, the power of second chances, and the incredible things that happen when we choose love over fear. Remember, you have the power to be someone's Tommy Harrison today. You can choose to see past someone's worst moment to the person they could become. You can offer kindness when cruelty would be easier. You can extend a second chance to someone who doesn't deserve it yet, but might prove worthy of it if given the opportunity. The world is changed not by grand gestures but by small acts of grace, by choosing to believe that people can be better than they were yesterday. Every one of us will face moments when we can either be Sarah at the beginning of this story, letting our frustration and prejudice guide our actions, or Tommy throughout it all, choosing kindness even when it's hard. The choice we make in those moments doesn't just define us, it has the power to transform others. So go out there and be the person who sees potential where others see problems, who offers grace where others offer judgment, and who believes in the power of redemption even when it seems impossible. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for their second chance, and you might be the one to give it to them.